so that we can get a lot more discussion going about the education issue, I'm going to go ahead and start reading about our speakers. Hayley Stenger grew up in Arizona, where she attended ASU and earned a bachelor's degree in elementary education. She began teaching in 2010 and left a few years later after teaching in both district and charter schools. Hayley is now the mother of 2 young children, the eldest of whom will soon enter kindergarten. She has presented the AZ Ed 101 and is currently the Legislative District 12 co-captain for Save Our Schools Arizona, where she enjoys engaging with the public to promote public schools in Arizona. Cathy Sigmon is, I'm wondering if you should stand up at least so we can know Hayley. Hayley's right here. And then Cathy, if you want to stand up, she's a 20-year resident of Arizona with a background in business, retail, product development, and project management. Her father was born in Bisbee, and her great-grandfather was a foreman at the Copper Queen mine, so she has a deep attachment to the state. And I just lost my place. She has a BA from Boston University and an MBA from Norwich University. She is a co-founder of Save Our Schools Arizona, which formed in early 2017 to oppose the universal voucher expansion bill passed by the Arizona legislature and signed by Governor Ducey. The group successfully placed the bill, known as Prop 305, I don't know if you remember that, on the ballot. I think it was to fool us, and achieved a resounding victory in November 2010. Save Our Schools Arizona is now working at the Arizona legislature and in communities around the state to restore public education funding and to promote transparency and accountability for all public school funds. Cathy is the Director of Finance and Operations for Save Our Schools. And then Michelle is an 18-year Arizona educator and has taught in the elementary, junior high, high school, and collegiate setting. Currently, Michelle is a special education teacher at Castile High School in Chandler, and she also serves as a career and technical educator for the Early Childhood Education Program. In addition to her role as full-time classroom teacher, she has a teaching fellowship with Understood, an organization comprised of 15 nonprofits that work to address the needs of the 1 in 5 students in the United States with learning and attention issues. She also serves as vice president for the Chandler Education Association. She's a mom of 4 incredible children, ranging in ages from 13 to 21, who works closely with families in the autism community, as 2 of her children are students with autism. Educational policy and advocacy is both her work and her passion. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming these 3 very dedicated women. Oh, I'm going to give you this one.
Take this one. We'll go so far. All right. Hi, I'm Cathy Sigmon. We're going to do short introductions of ourselves, and you guys are very lucky today. We don't usually travel in packs like this, but we wanted to make sure that we spoke to this group from a variety of different perspectives, and we definitely have that. I have never been an educator, although I have 2 30-something children who went all the way through public schools. I went through public schools in New York, moved to California, and then 22 years ago I moved to Arizona. And one of the things, I don't know if you're familiar with Prop 13 in California, but it was sort of the beginning of the tax revolution, and it froze property taxes for people who were staying in their homes. And one of property taxes, of course, fund public education. So by the time I moved out of Arizona, or out of California, I was actually very frightened for the state of public education there. And I was very pleased to come to Arizona and see, you know, new school buildings, all kinds of great facilities. And I felt, oh, my kids are going to get a much better education here. It is much better funded here in Arizona. You know, fast forward to 2016, my kids had long, graduated, gone through college, and were off to their lives. And after 2016, I was flabbergasted at what had happened to public education in that time period since my children graduated from public school. So it was an unbelievably eye-opening experience for me, and part of what has led to my activism on behalf of public education here in Arizona. So I have been in business my entire career. I worked at PetSmart for 16 years, and I retired 4 years ago to take up picture framing, and that's what I thought I was going to be doing. So this has been a huge surprise to me that this is actually what I am spending all my waking hours working on, is Save Our Schools Arizona, and the impact that we hope to make on turning around this systematic defunding of public education here in Arizona. And I also say, just one last note, that there's very little I can do. In fact, pretty much nothing I can do at the national level. But in Arizona, my voice can be heard, and so can yours. So state politics and local politics could not be more important to our daily lives. So if you're not currently involved, I really urge you to start educating yourself about what our Arizona legislature is doing, because we are having a big impact. So thank you. I'll let Michelle introduce herself.
Hello, my name is Michelle Capriotti, and I love getting the opportunity to present with Cathy. She is kind of like the one. So this is like being amongst royalty, so to say, with Save Our Schools. So I've been a classroom teacher in Arizona since 1995, had what I call sabbaticals here and there when I had my children, stayed home for short periods of time, but have continued to be actively involved in the classroom. However, I never really considered myself political. I was the person who would, sign a petition here or there, or, watch the news, and felt like I knew everything. And then 2016 happened, and I learned what it truly meant to become engaged, and truly what it meant to be not just an educator, but to be an engaged and educated educator. I spent many a nights at the Capitol last year, slept over. I don't even know how many times I've driven down there. Recently, I was supposed to go to an event downtown, and you know how your car goes in like auto mode, and found myself in the parking lot of the Capitol, and that's not where I was supposed to be. But that's been my home away from home, needless to say. And a year and a half ago, I could not have said that. I'm not even sure I knew necessarily how to get there. I didn't see myself as a person that was politically engaged because my job was to be a teacher. But I quickly learned that to be a teacher in Arizona, if you really want to be change, you have to create the change. So I became involved with numerous campaigns, and this is definitely my home. Save Our Schools is something I'm incredibly passionate about. Having 4 children in the educational system who've had very diverse backgrounds. I have one graduating from college here in just a month. I can't believe it. And then I have got, my youngest is 14, and he's just a little 7th grader. So I've had gifted children go through the gifted programs, but I'm also have 2 children with autism. So I'm very passionate about things related to and connected to special education. And I'm a firm believer that our students with special education are best served in our public schools. So I've done a lot of advocacy work with them. I'm a special education teacher, grades 7 through 12. So I live it, sleep it, breathe it. It's a 24/7 hour job for me, but I define job, and when it's your passion, it's something you're really committed to, it doesn't feel that way. So I'm very excited to be here today, and thank you for spending your time with us today as well.
Hi, my name is Hayley Stenger. I'm a former teacher. I went to ASU, and I originally was a political science major. I did it for 3 years, and I decided I was going to go to law school. I changed my mind because I thought speaking in front of people and issues that were sometimes controversial was not the direction I wanted to go in, and obviously I've come a long way from that. I switched to education because my passion is learning and information. I wanted to spread that to children. That was my dream. And so I went in 2007, changed my major. 6 months later, we had a recession. And so I went, and my first job I applied for, I was one of 24 teachers applying for that job with no experience. And I went to so many jobs, looking for so many jobs. I applied. I was new teacher, fresh meat. You know, I was going up against experienced teachers. So my first year teaching, I got a job in the end. And my first year, within 6 months, I was laid off. I was the last to come, the first to go. So I went a mile down the street and got a job at a charter school. And I taught there for 2 years. It was a difficult 2 years for me. The populations between the district school and the charter school were incredibly different. And I had a hard time with some of the reasons of that. So after 3 years, I left with a really bitter taste in my mouth, really disappointed, disenchanted, and I thought, I'm never going back to teaching, I'm never going back to education, I'm done with this, and this is something other people can deal with. And so I left, and I went and had kids. And then, I realized my kids are gonna need to go to school someday. And so I decided I'm going to leave. I'm going to move out of the state. I'm seeing teachers leaving the state in droves. I'm going to go and take my kids to a state that cares about public education. There's nothing I can do about it. So we had a plan. We're going to leave in spring 2020, go somewhere on the East Coast where they have a good education program. So I went, after the election, I wanted to get involved in something kind of a little bit, put my time into something. You know, I'm a stay-at-home mom. I should donate some time and do something besides that since I'm not working. So I went to a presentation for Save Our Schools, and I sat back and looked at it, and it blew my mind. So I took photos of every single slide. I wrote notes all over the place. My notebook was filled up with comments and notes, and I took it home and I read it to my husband. I was like, I can't believe it. Like, this is what's been going on. This is exactly what I experienced when I was teaching. And although it was personal to me, it was going on to everyone else as well. And I hadn't had that clarity. And so I ended up, after the presentation, I walked up and I said, where can I sign up? How can I do this? And I can present to people. I can do this. I have no idea how to present. I've never done it before. And this was not the direction I wanted to go into, but I think I can do it. And so I went and I read voraciously about education in the system, and that was a year and a half ago, and I'm so happy that the people were paying attention when I wasn't paying attention, and that they were part of it when I wasn't a part of it, when I needed that time for myself to heal, that other people were making a difference. And so I'm so grateful to Save Our Schools for that, and I'm so grateful to the team and the people I've met since then.
Thank you. Now, we are going to tag team our presentation. I'm going to do the first few slides, and then I'll hand it over to Michelle, I think. Oh, to Hayley. Okay. So Save Our Schools Arizona, this is our 2019 Education Roadshow. And we developed a roadshow because the reason for our organization is to revive public education. And what is public education but something that affects everybody, whether you have children in schools or not. We are truly a grassroots organization. We are volunteers, and we are still all volunteers. So several of the people on our leadership team are still working full-time jobs. So spreading this type of information is absolutely critical to achieving the result that we want to achieve, both at the legislature and in communities all over the state. So what I'll talk about is who we are, how we got here, our mission, the Arizona classroom crisis, and what can we do to fix it. This was at one of the first things we did in our newly formed team was make a banner. So we were pretty proud of it. So we are nonpartisan, and I emphasize that because this is what has given us a unique position in the state. There are two things that are very critical about our organization. We are nonpartisan and we are grassroots. And those two parts of who we are give us an enormous amount of leverage. So we are nonpartisan, we are community-based, that means we're grassroots, and we're fighting for strong public schools because we believe that will make a stronger Arizona. So this is our origin story. None of us, we didn't know each other in 2016 when the election happened. And like many people, speaking for myself, I was just flabbergasted and I said, I've been on the sidelines for too long. I absolutely have to do something. So what I started doing was joining a small group of women to register people for request to speak down at the legislature. How many people here are registered for request to speak? Yeah, I was a fair number. How many of you, of the people who are registered, how many of you actually use it? That is great. So this was 3 years ago. I didn't even know where the state capitol was. So one of the first things I did, because parking is my obsession, I get so flustered when I'm looking for a parking place. I made a parking map at the Capitol, and we still use that map. So I really sympathize with people who have never been down to the Capitol because they don't know where to park. So Request to Speak is an amazing system that we have here in Arizona, if you're not aware of it. It doesn't mean you actually have to go and speak, although that's how it was originally designed. It allows you, from the comfort of your home, in your pajamas, in your fuzzy bunny slippers, to tell the Arizona legislature what you think about the bills that they're considering. Once you're registered, you can go online, you can read the legislation, you can see who's promoting it, you can learn an enormous amount, and then you can give it literally a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and that goes into the public record for the state of Arizona. And they do pay attention. I've heard many times legislators refer to the number of RTSs, thumbs up or thumbs down, on a particular piece of legislation to try to impress on their colleagues how important a particular bill is. So if you want to ask me later, I can tell you how to register for Request to Speak, because I'm still doing that 3 years later. So I started going down to the legislature because you have to enter these names in the kiosk down there. And while I was there, I said, well, maybe I'll go see what the House of Representatives is doing. You can go right up in the gallery on the 3rd floor and look down on them doing their, whatever they do. They're playing solitaire at their desks or whatever they're doing. And so then I started going to committee meetings, and I found that in that particular session, which was the beginning of 2017, there was one bill that was rallying a huge amount of controversy, and that was an expansion of what's called Empowerment Scholarship Accounts, or ESAs. We call them ESA Vouchers because that's what they are. A statewide expansion, a universal expansion. And what this does literally is it takes money out of our general fund that is used for public education, and it redirects it to private schools, either private schools, religious schools, or even homeschooling. And this is a program that was originated back in, I think, around 2009, was declared unconstitutional, was reintroduced in 2011, and has now been gradually expanding, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So Arizona has always been a sort of a breeding ground for this type of legislation because Arizona is a fairly conservative and a fairly libertarian state. So a lot of the forces behind privatization of public education have tested the waters here in Arizona. And they wanted to, in 2017, in that legislative session, they had already, the groups such as Americans for Prosperity and the American Federation for Children, and if you're familiar with those groups, the former is the Koch brothers group, and the latter is the DeVos families group. They have been working on privatization of education for ages. And they had, in 2016 and 2014, they had invested quite a bit in the campaigns, the election campaigns of various legislators in Arizona, so they could get the legislature they wanted, so that they could get this passed. So the bill was introduced by Debbie Lesko, who is now a congresswoman, of course, in CD9. And she is quite the acolyte of the Koch brothers and has gone to their national meetings many times, very proudly. So she introduced the legislation, and it went through committees, and then it stalled because it didn't have enough votes to pass. So interest was gathering. We were going to hearings, and that's really where I met many of the people that I'm working with today. They were people who came to the committee meetings, and while we were waiting to either hear the legislators talk, or when you're in committee, you can sign up and you can testify. And that was the first time I ever stood up in front of legislators and testified, was against this voucher expansion. That was where we met. And so we had a good long time. They went through committee, long committee meeting that went way into the night before they essentially did exactly what they had planned to do anyway, which was pass the bill. But then it stalled because they didn't quite have enough votes to pass in the Senate, the Arizona Senate. So they waited and waited and waited until they were finally able to flip that one last legislator, and the bill was passed and immediately was signed by Governor Ducey that day. And the very first thing that happened was that Betsy DeVos tweeted congratulations to Governor Ducey, and the Goldwater Institute sent a celebratory email out to their mailing list saying, you know, it's been 20 years in the making, and finally we've done it. But don't worry, the cap that they put on the bill in order to flip that last vote, don't worry, we'll get it lifted. So many of us went home. We were terribly discouraged and had no idea what we wanted to do. And one of us, one person who was a little more politically savvy, leaped up and said, you know, we can actually refer a bill to the voters. And none of us had any idea how to do that. And in fact, one of our co-founders says, you know, we were literally sitting around Googling, how do you refer a bill? But probably the smartest thing we did after that was to hire a lawyer. And we got a fantastic lawyer, and she has been with us every step of the way. I just cannot say enough good things about her. Extremely knowledgeable election lawyer, and she helped us write our statement, file at the Secretary of State, create a political action committee, and we had no idea what we were doing or what we were getting into. But I won't go into any more details. You know what happened. I'll bet. How many of you signed the petition that we circulated? I came here, I think it was a couple of years ago, and collected signatures, so it's really wonderful to be back. We collected 111,000 signatures in 90 days, which was how long we had. And when we turned in those petitions at the Secretary of State's office on August 8th or 9th in 2017, the sweetest words I heard were when the director of elections, Eric Spencer, said, "You've turned in the petitions, the law is now on hold," because the next day it would have gone into effect. So that was not the end of our battles. We were sued by Americans for Prosperity and the Goldwater Institute. As you know, these organizations have bottomless funding, and one of their tactics is to bankrupt the groups that they go up against. And I can assure you we are still paying off our legal bills. We had to fight them all the way up to the Arizona Supreme Court. And we were very lucky, and our lawyer was extremely savvy, because we were able to win that case on a technicality. And as you know, the two big petitions that circulated last year, Outlaw Dirty Money and Invest in Ed, were both thrown out by the Supreme Court for various reasons. In one case because they invalidated a bunch of signatures, and in the other case because they considered that the 100-word statement that was written on the petition was misleading. So our lawyer was able to get us through that thicket, and we were able to win on a true technicality. So then we had to fight all the way through the legislative session in 2018, because even many of our allies wanted to repeal the bill that we had referred to the ballot. And we were so determined, and we were able to lobby successfully to keep the bill from being repealed legislatively. Then we had to run our entire campaign. We're still all volunteers, but we had to get staff. We had to print yard signs. I mean, it was crazy. None of us were knowledgeable about how to do this, but again, we did it. And Prop 305 was defeated by a 2-to-1 margin in November. So that is the background for Save Our Schools Arizona. And after the election, we knew that we had started pulling a thread of this story, and there was so much more to that entire tapestry. So we knew that we were going to continue as a group, but we had to reintroduce ourselves. And that's why we developed this Roadshow. So we succeeded in our campaign. That was actually from our victory party, when it was an amazing night. So that is what we're doing. We're reintroducing ourselves, because we have a lot of work ahead of us, and we're depending on the people of Arizona to understand what public education means to our society and to our economy. So our job is to educate communities about the value of public education, to empower parents and teachers in their communities, to advocate for responsible education policy, and that involves a lot of work down at the legislature, to keep public dollars in public schools, and ensure transparency and accountability for all of our taxpayer dollars, because once that money goes into private education, we lose a huge amount of visibility of how it's actually spent. We also collaborate with groups all over the state, and we hope to start collaborating with similar groups all around the country, because this, of course, Arizona is not unique. Arizona is very fortunate that public education is accounted for in our Constitution, which was adopted in 1910. And you can read there what is written into the Arizona Constitution about establishment of a fair and equitable uniform public school system. And legislators, when they swear an oath to uphold the Arizona Constitution, including this clause. So there we are in the gallery, actually, of the House. It became sort of a home away from home. As Michelle was saying, my car can now find its way down there alone. So now what I'll start talking about and leave to the others to continue is our classroom crisis and the terrible state that we are in today from a financial standpoint, part of which has its origins in the economic crisis, but a huge amount of it doesn't. And I'm going to refer to a few notes as I go too, because when I get into the details, I'm not as fluent about what I need to say. So, I think after the Red for Ed movement last year, huge uprising, and I think a huge sort of awakening of the state to the dire condition of our public schools. We are still 48th in the United States in funding per student. We have the second most crowded class sizes in the country. That is just horrible for the learning environment. And the median teacher salary, even after the raises that teachers finally fought for and got last year, we're still 45th in the United States. We are also facing a massive teacher shortage. As Hayley was saying, a lot of teachers have stepped out of the classroom. And it's not so much that we have a shortage of qualified teachers, it's that so many of them have gone to work in other occupations because their pay is so abysmal. We have over 3,000 classrooms without a certified teacher. And that's really important to take note of because certification is what allows a teacher to teach, not just the knowledge of their subject area, but knowing how to teach a classroom of students. And what the governor has done and what the legislature has done is dumb down the qualifications for being a teacher. And so that a huge number of teachers who are standing in front of the class may not even have a college degree and have certainly not learned how to control a classroom, let alone teach them. The single most important thing for creating an educated population is the quality of teaching. Also, 70,000 students do not have a permanent teacher. There are many classrooms over, let's see, there are 2,000 plus classrooms that don't have a permanent teacher, and so they are staffed with long-term substitutes, and substitutes don't have the same qualifications. That is really horrifying. So effective teaching is the single most influential factor impacting student learning, and we are in a crisis. Here you can see the rate of teachers leaving the classroom and where Arizona stands. There's nothing like a good graph for showing. Arizona has cut more money out of K-12 education than any other state. You can see Alabama, more than Kentucky, more than Oklahoma. So Arizona, is leading in all the statistics that we do not want to lead on. 42% of Arizona teachers quit within 3 years. 22% of the teachers hired between 2013 and 2015 were not teaching in Arizona after 1 year. Over 1/3 of Arizona teachers have been in the classroom for 1 year or less. I mean, these are really horrifying statistics. So Arizona is still making cuts despite the economic recovery. So anyone who says, well, it's because of the financial crisis, I honestly think that a lot of our politicians just took advantage of that as the reason to cut funding and not restore it. It has not always been this bad in Arizona, although it has been a steady trajectory. In the mid-90s, and that's when my kids were in school. Schools were adequately funded. And in 1960, we ranked 19th in the entire country. But obviously, we have sunk down. And an entire generation of children have started school and graduated in this terrible situation. So I'm now going to hand it over to Hayley.
Okay, and just to speak to Cathy's point a little bit, sorry, I don't want to trip over the cord, that'd be a little embarrassing. Just to speak to Cathy's point, when I was teaching my first year, I taught in a rural community, and I was a first-year teacher. There were a lot of problems in the school, from drug abuse to suicide prevention to just really deep issues that at the age of 22 with no experience besides my college experience, I should not have been in a classroom like that. There should have been a teacher that was more experienced. And I think that when you have first-year teachers that are in the school, there so much accounts for experience. And the kids that are in communities, any community, deserve teachers who are experienced and willing to stay and want to stay. And I do plan to stay in Arizona after it's the fight or flight thing. I do plan to stay. At first I wanted to fly, but now I'm willing to fight. So many states with similar populations have a budget over 2 times the amount for K-12 education. Arizona spends about 43% of its budget to education. The problem isn't the amount we give, or percentage-wise, is about average. The problem is the size of the pie. It's the budget. And so if you look, Arizona gives $4 billion, but our pie is significantly smaller. Indiana, with a similar population, they have a much bigger budget, and they give $7.9 billion to education. And Washington State give $8.7 billion to education, and they have a similar size population. So our budget for our state is very small and can use $2 to $3 billion more to make it more equitable among the rest of the states. Arizona's state budget comes up far short, and so does K-12 education spending. And again, this is kind of reiterating what the last slide said, but you can see we have a budget of $3.9 billion going to education out of a budget of $9.5 billion. In Tennessee, it's $4.5 billion with a budget of $13.2. And so you can see, compared to Indiana and Washington as well, our budget is just significantly shorter. And the green is the overall budget. The yellow, just to clarify, is the education budget. Our education budgets are small, but our overall budget is small as well. And so that's where that comes from. And I see in my mailers I get, when I first saw this presentation, I got a mailer the week after, and it said 43% of our budget goes to public education. That's enough. It's not the percentage, it's the size of the pie. And so that sounds like a really great selling point, but when you look at it and break it down, it's not as good. We could use a lot more. So Arizona gives away much more than it spends. We give away $14 billion in tax credits when we only have a budget of $10 billion. And we are getting more and more tax credits every year. I think we had 5 in 1980, and now we have over 300. And the thing with tax credits is they can be introduced by a single majority in the legislature, but it takes a supermajority to get rid of them. And so, which was actually introduced in an initiative in the 1990s. But so every time a tax credit is added, then it's there, unless we can get a supermajority, which is not likely to happen. It has happened, but it's not likely. And we have tax credits that aren't useful anymore. When we bring corporations or companies, we want to incentivize them with the tax credit, but once they're here, we don't need that tax credit for them anymore a lot of the times, but there's no way to go through and get rid of those tax credits without a supermajority. And so this is just a little cartoon. It's vouchers, and it's pick it clean for the children, and it's eating public education, as you can see, or the vultures are eating public education, finishing the job. So the privatization cycle, and I think this slide actually is one of the ones that speaks to me a lot, and if you want to take pictures of anything, feel absolutely free. But it starts with defunding our public education. They want to, in a lot of states, you'll see this, not just in Arizona, where they slash public education by $1 billion or a significant amount of money and force underperformance. The schools are then dealing with less, trying to provide education for just as many and sometimes more students. Like in Arizona, our population is constantly growing, and we're dealing with less budget after the recession. They removed teacher autonomy, and this was a big reason I left teaching. This was one of my issues with it, is as a teacher, when you aren't able to address the needs of your students in a way that you feel and have been trained to feel is going to make them more successful, you feel like a failure as a teacher. And your students, you can see them struggling, but you can't reach out to them in the way that is meaningful to their education. And I know a lot of teachers have felt this way about education. And after I've entered into this, talking to a lot of them, I have seen how prevalent and why a lot of teachers have left education as a result of teacher autonomy. It's the most heartbreaking thing when you know the need of your student, but you can't address it. They prop up private alternatives, so via policy, funding, and marketing, a lot of schools can spend, who are private schools, they can spend their money on advertising, or charter schools can advertise. And so, you have this failing school in your district, but you have this really great neighboring school that's a private school. Why don't you go to that one? And they grade schools on performance, and then fund schools based on grades. And then the loop repeats over and over again. And so the person, I always say, who's let down at the end of this is the student. As a teacher leaving, I'm okay. I have 2 kids, they're doing great. They have a former teacher for a mom who is going to passionately advocate for their education and provide for it. But who's not going to be okay are the students who are left behind. And that's my issue here. Here is a big number. This is $186,149,744 per year in ESA and STO voucher schemes that are taken from our public budget and give it to private education. This is increasing every year as well. So this is right now where we are giving that much money every year from our budget to private education. And we'll talk about ESAs and STOs, so if you don't know what those are, there's not a test right now. So ESA vouchers are debit cards. They're loaded with taxpayer dollars and given to parents to spend on educational expenses, including private school tuition. It used to be for vouchers that you could just give the money directly to the private schools, and the state ruled that unconstitutional because it was a First Amendment issue with separation of church and state. So the legislature went around that and said, instead of giving the money directly to the schools, we will give it to the parents to give to the schools. And so that's where we are with ESAs. The amount is $5,000 to $30,000 per student, and it is limited to certain categories of students. So right now, the students able to use ESAs are special needs students, and just students of certain categories that they feel needed. And that's kind of to open the door so they can, like Prop 305 did, expanded it to every student. There's no accountability, and there's well-documented fraud. And so they say they don't have the government says they don't have the resources to investigate the fraud for it. So people have used ESAs for things like a lady used it for an abortion at one point. And so there's a good AZ Central article on this if you want to explore some of the ways they've used ESAs for fraud. And it drains $80 million from our public schools every year. So instead of going to, for special needs students and providing, there's 100,000, I believe, in the state of Arizona, instead of providing those students with adequate resources, they cut their resources and then now give this $80 million to private schools. So the children are left behind who still need those resources in their special education. And so you can see every year ESA costs and enrollment is increasing every single year. And so right now we're giving, I guess 2017, we were giving $46 million a year, but 2012 that was 1.6 million. So every year is a significant increase in the money that we are giving to private education that's taken away from our public education. And I'm going to turn it over now to Michelle, who's going to give the rest of the presentation.
Okay, now it's time for the reading glasses, because I can see all of you, but then I can't see my notes in front of me. I can probably read off the back wall, but let me just click forward. There we go. All right, so STOs are school tuition. Whoops, I went too fast. What did I do? I'm going the wrong way. There we go. Am I right? What am I doing? I'm hitting one. Okay, there we go. Okay, so our school tuition organizations, and these are companies that process tax credits for private school tuition. So you can give up to $4,000 per year, and 93% of that money is going to schools that are supporting religious education. So that is obviously taking away, again, from our public school students. We are not saying that we don't support choice. However, choice is choice, and if you choose that choice, then choose to pay for it, but it should not come at the expense of the taxpayer. STOs themselves are able to keep 10% of that money for administrative cost. So even all of that money is not even going directly to the student or to the classroom that student is a part of. And we also see where students may start a school year at a private school, get this money, and then leave said private school and return to the public school, and the public school then does not get paid on that student. And that's been a big issue. And as a public school educator, especially as a public school educator who works with special needs children, this is not a rumor. This is something I see happen all the time. They start the school year 6, 8, 7, 8 weeks in. By the end of the first quarter, the child's not successful in this private school because they don't always offer the certified teachers and have the resources to educate the child, and so the child leaves, but that money stays where it started. It does not follow to the public school that the child now attends. So now the public school system has the responsibility, because public schools educate all, of educating this child without that money. And like I said, it's not a rumor. I've experienced it. I get the IEPs and usually have to fix them because they're wrong. And now I'm responsible for the education of that child without that money. It topped $160 million in 2016, and the cap is increasing by 20% every year as it stands. So, oops, I went the wrong way. There we go. All right, so you can kind of see here the growth that has transpired over time. If you look back down to the very bottom, down in 1998 to where we are in 2016. So the growth has been tremendous over time. And like, Cathy kind of addressed with our current legislative process, it's very difficult to get these things reversed. So our job is to we kind of come at it from a preventative standpoint. How do we prevent things? Because to get them out is much more difficult. So that is part of our job. A question that we often get is, how is this legal? Because to me, and even that was a question I had, and I you know, consider myself even after all this time, like, I'm a politic, like, I don't understand. I'm pretty sure I'm familiar with the Constitution, separation of church and state, like, where am I confused? This actually was a case that went up to the Arizona Supreme Court, and it was about, you know, I think Hayley addressed it, and it was defeated, and the voucher program was allowed to continue to support the public school, or the private schools, the religious education school at this particular case. And with that, the U.S. Supreme Court did not hear the case. So that's kind of where we are with that. And in my dream world, that's where we go with this, because to me, it's pretty clear and pretty evident the direction that we're traveling in. But as Cathy mentioned, you know, we are fighting. We are a grassroots organization. When you're fighting with people that have billions of dollars, and for the most part, you know, I'm a teacher from, I'd like to say from 8 to 4, but reality 6 to 6, that we just don't have the same kind of money and the same kind of resources to fight. It's kind of a David and Goliath situation there. So a couple myths about vouchers, because I know it can get a little confusing, the difference between vouchers and private schools and charter schools and public schools, and it kind of can get a little confusing at times. So myth number 1 is that the vouchers help low-income students. And this is what some of our legislators love to tell people, that we give these vouchers so that our poor students can now attend these private schools. Well, a private school on average, I'll pick a typical high school, private high school, costs about $18,000 a year. The typical vouchers, as mentioned, is about $5,000 a year. So do the math. They're still $13,000 shy. So these are not kids that are going to be able to, these low, poor-income kids are not suddenly going to have $13,000 additional dollars now to go to said private school. So most of our ESA vouchers are used by families who are leaving our top-rated schools, our A and B schools, to go to private academies. And statistically, vouchers are not typically used by our low-income families, even though that's what many people want us to believe, because that remaining cost, that voucher gap, is still significantly too high for many of our Arizona families. Vouchers save taxpayers money. You might hear this a lot in headline news. So that's an absolute false. It is true that ESA vouchers are valued at 90% of what public schools spend. However, that's the big part, the however part, that it comes straight from our general fund. When we look at how schools are funded, we get money from the state, we get money from a federal level. All the monies that come for the voucher system come strictly out of general fund. So it does actually cost us more to educate that student. And most of our students that are using the systems are already in these private schools. They're not leaving public school to go to private school, but now that the expansion has happened, kids that were already attending private schools now are just getting supplemented with this additional income. So it's really impacting us dramatically there as well. This is another one. Voucher school, sometimes you're like, what's the difference between the voucher school, or excuse me, a private school and a charter school? Charter schools are a public school. They play by a different set of rules, but they are not a private school, and vouchers are not used at private schools. So ESA vouchers divert public funds from all public schools, that includes charter schools, specifically to private schools. So this kind of gives you like a little screenshot of the difference between the two. So on your far left, you have your traditional district schools. Public schools, we have the most transparency. Every dime I spend as a public school educator is accounted for. It's a public record. It goes to the school board. If I want to do anything, I have to fill out 47 pieces of documentation to get, a new box of pencils. We are audited consistently. We have a school board that is elected by the constituents of that school district. We serve all children, and to me that's the most important part as a special education teacher. We serve ELL students. We serve students with special needs. There is no student that comes to our door that we do not educate, and that is a big differentiator between the other two. So we have our charter schools, which are run by private contractors. And you've probably seen this in the news a lot, and you ask yourselves, how do they make millions of dollars off of these systems. Arizona has some of the loosest regulations in charter schools, which is, there was a great article that was put out by the New York Times, and I think the best line I heard is, we are the low-hanging fruit, so to say, because we have such loose regulations, thanks to the Koch brothers, thanks to the DeVos families. They have, like we said, essentially bought our legislators. And our legislators vote on the very bills that they're personally vested in. So that in and of itself can be a conflict of interest. They are reviewed every 5 years by the charter school board, so kind of like a peer evaluation. It'd be like me grading her. So not an outside entity, the way the traditional public schools, and then by the board every 15 years. So a lot different than your traditional public schools. They do not have to provide ELL or SPED services, food, or transportation. So again, going back to that funding formula, all of the money that goes to a charter school comes directly out of general fund. They do not receive federal money because they don't really want to play by federal rules. Because in federal rules, you have to provide food and transportation. That is a cost that when you are working in a public school, if you ever looked at a public school budget, which is on every public school's website, we are very transparent. You can see that transportation and food is not something that we profit from. In fact, we usually take a loss on a lot of those things, but those are essentials. Well, you have to provide those things. However, in a charter school, you do not. And so they don't take that federal money because they don't want to play by those rules. So all the money that they get comes straight out of that general fund. So there's a little bit of inequity there in terms of that funding formula. And then you come to private schools, which are privately funded. They don't have to really follow any rules. They get to decide who they want to educate. They don't have to take special education students. They don't have to take ELL students. They get to decide, themselves how they want to run. They don't have an elected school board. The visibility is essentially non-existent. They don't apply. They don't have to follow any federal laws, IDA, disability. They don't have to provide food or transportation. So you can see the vast contrast in the regulations that have to be followed by each of those entities. So, our motto, strong schools, strong state. Certainly those of you that have been in Arizona know, and if you have children, raising children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, anyone, you know that the education is the foundation of our future. So we must prioritize. Education in Arizona is in dire straits, and I can speak to that because I live it every day. It's my job. I have seen this. I've been an educator since 1996, so I know what a fully funded educational classroom looks like, and I know what it looks like now. I know what it was like when I had 23 students in my classroom, and I know what it's like when I have 35 students in my classroom. And despite what Ms. DeVos said in testimony about a week and a half ago, class size does matter. I don't know if any of you got to see that. It looked a little bit like an SNL skit, but it was real. True story. And so it is difficult and it is challenging. And Hayley tapped on it, that the students that are coming to us now, I think back, gosh, like I said, I've been doing this a long time. 1995 was when I had my first classroom. And I think, gosh, I was, fortunate in the sense that my students came to me, for the most part, were pretty emotionally stable, came from strong families, but we're noticing that our kids today are coming to us with a lot different issues than they ever came to us with. And I teach in Chandler. I'm at a pretty, middle class neighborhood, but I still have kids that come to my door every day needing much more than just, math and English. And we have the highest counselor ratio in the country. 950 to 1 is our current counselor ratio. Our counselors do not enjoy doing paperwork, but when you have 950 of them, that's all you have time for. And so we have a real desperate need to kind of remember that we are not just educating the mind, but we are educating the child as a whole. And our children are coming to us broken. And our need and our ability to do our jobs means I can't have 35. I've got kindergarten teachers that have 26 and no aid. 26 5-year-olds, and it's at that point it's crisis management all the time, and it's not truly what we want to give our children. So great public schools, they do have an economic impact as well. They help to raise our property values. They help to build our strong economy. They help our businesses recruit. We get that a lot of feedback from, with chambers, like, we need this, we need that, we need this. I'm like, great, I agree with you. We're not disagreeing. However, those things cost money, and we can only do so much with what you're giving us. We're doing the absolute best that we can. I can say that wholeheartedly with every member of my staff. But as our class sizes grow, that does continue to be a huge challenge. So, and we must provide equity across all public schools. It shouldn't be my kid goes to this school and my kid goes to this school and they're getting this vastly different education, which we know right now is an indefinite issue in Arizona. So now the next step, what is it that we can do? Like I said, a year and a half ago, I was a teacher, and I thought that was where my day started and ended. I didn't know about requests to speak and my ability to go down and advocate at the Capitol. So this kind of gives you a little bit of how-to, some next steps. First of all, we'd love for you to join us via our emails. So we're going to pass around. Haley, do you have it? We'll pass it around if you're interested in getting on our email list. This is one of the quickest ways for us to kind of disperse information. If you're a Facebook person or a Twitter person, we do Facebook and tweet a lot. We'd love for you to follow us on social media. Again, it's another quick and inexpensive way as a grassroots movement. We're always looking for ways that we can communicate to the masses rather inexpensively. So that's one of our best ways. You can see our website up there, sosarizona.org/donate. Because again, like we said, our T-shirts, our signs, all those things, they do cost money. So if you are interested in donating, that is where we can go there and get more involved. If you would like we said, we all have different stories that brought us here. And I'm sure there's plenty of different stories out there. I know we were talking, a few of you I know have a retired teacher, an AEA member back there. And so I loved getting to talk with all of you. Don't think that I wasn't a teacher and therefore I don't really have a voice in this conversation. If you are living in Arizona, you have a vested interest in the education of our children. And so there's some way for you to be that voice, because I think what's so important, what I've learned through this process is that I can speak as a teacher, and I can address a certain audience. I can speak as a parent, and I maybe get a different lens on an audience. But I brought my husband with me before, and he's a businessman, and he's never taught. Says, I wouldn't want your job for an hour. And I said, honey, I don't think high schoolers would want you to be their teacher for an hour, so that's a good thing you have in common. But he can address an audience differently than I can. So you each have a story. You each have a way that you could impact this movement. And so we invite you to join us in our quest, our journey to restore and not even just bring back, but make better our current public school system. So if you have any questions, please grab any of us. We'll be more than happy. I think we're going to do a Q&A session. So if you have questions, hopefully one of the three of us have a great answer. And if not, we will definitely get the answer back to you.
In the beginning, you had a statistic about Arizona teachers being 45th in the state regarding pay. How much are they actually paid?
That's a very loaded question. And I always tell people it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz. And we used to be, back when I started in teaching in 1995, we had a step system or a salary system. For lack of a better way, we had a kind of an XY. You had your x-axis going across is your educational experience, and your y was your years of experience. And every year you moved up because you gained a year of experience, and if you went to school, you moved across, and you could kind of see where you would be 10 years from now. If I go on and get my master's, this is where I'm going to be. We no longer have that step system, and I don't think any school districts. We've been kind of fighting to restore that, because there seems to be like this, I wonder what my salary is going to be this year. The median is about $55,000 a year, but again, it really varies district to district. What Chandler pays versus what a rural school district can pay is vastly different. So median is always, I always tell people, it's very subjective in nature. We've worked to kind of increase the bottom of the pay scales at many of our school districts, because we're not attracting new educators. We're getting kids that are fresh out of college that go, I could be a teacher for $38,000, or I can go work anywhere else and make 45. And so we started to kind of look at that, at ways to encourage new educators. When we looked at students that are entering prep programs, less than 3% of our college entrances in Arizona are saying we're going to go into education. That's a problem, because in 2 years we have 25% of our current educational teachers that can retire, and we have no one coming in. So it really varies. 55 is the median, but it can go up or down based on the district. So I hope I answered that question.
Well, sort of. I mean,
Sort of?
see,
Okay.
55 sounds really good, but
Well, okay,
I mean,
so
it's
like it's to be the 55 person, I mean, you would have to have 15 to 16 years in the profession and have a master's degree. So a starting teacher is about 38 to 36. It depends on the district, 36 to 38.
I started teaching in 2010, and I started with $27,000 as my salary every year. And when I switched to the charter school, which are traditionally lower, I didn't have any retirement, and I made $33,000 a year with no retirement. So we would just talk, we'll just teach forever. Like, we have no plan for retirement because we needed all our money to go. So we'll just continue teaching forever. So as a starting teacher, it was very low. And when I ended up quitting, I went and worked for my parents' business doing accounting, making $17 an hour, and it was much more money, actually. So it just, and much less stress. So just from a starting teacher perspective, that's where I was, and that was not too long ago.
I just broke the median, like, with the 20 by 2020, just to give you an idea. And I've been an educator since 1995. So, and I have 2 master's degrees. So if I was to take 2 master's degrees and 20 years experience to any other field, you'd probably double my salary. So it was the 20 by 2020 that got me over the 55 mark. So.
okay. Yeah, you've answered my question.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I have a question. So you mentioned that there were a limited number of counselors and children were coming in with things that need help other than education. Are there any things that we are doing as a group to bring more mindfulness, awareness to the children, mental training to the kids so that they can react better to these things with those skills?
I can speak to Chandler, and I can speak to my experience as a special education teacher. I do. Chandler has an initiative right now on that we're working on equity and inclusion in our classrooms, and we've had a big push this year in professional development for our educators that then filters down into our students. I also teach a social strategies class for children that have emotional disabilities, and many of my children have autism, so teaching those social skills. And then we do branch out to have after-school groups and those types of things. We bring in my particular school, social workers that are looking to get clinical hours. They run some groups for us. But again, that's all volunteer, so it's different from year to year what we're able to provide because it's really contingent upon the community.
I do know from a parent and from a volunteer aspect that there are parents that go to start groups at the schools. Some of them don't even have kids at those schools, just meet somebody who needs help. I know I live in the East Valley, as many of you probably do, and there's been a huge suicide problem with some of the East Valley high schools. And so I know one parent who's really upset by it and started an after-school program group to help students, and that's something you can do and look at your own home schools. I also know Sean Bowie, one of the legislators, he's senator, has been working really hard on a suicide prevention bill for schools as well, to try to address some of those needs.
Thank you.
It's my understanding that the pay raises that teachers won for not only teachers but for support staff last year have largely gone unfulfilled. Two questions. One, am I correct in that? And two, what's the game plan if I am correct?
So the way that it was funded, the vocabulary of the bill itself was that the 10%, it was 10% last year and then 5 and 5. So it wasn't a full 20 by 2020. So last year was 10%. The way that it was funded was that it was, the verbiage of the language is that it was 10% was given per student, per teacher with a student roster. So each district received money based on students that had, or teachers that had a roster. So I will use myself as a perfect case in point. 3/5 of my day, I have students in front of my classroom that I'm responsible for in teaching. But then 2/5 of my day, I go into a general educational classroom and support students with special needs with a general education teacher so that they're able to remain in the general education classroom with my support as a special education teacher. Therefore, I was only funded as 3/5 of an educator because they did not see the other 2/5 of my job. I don't have a class roster. The gen ed teacher had the roster, but I didn't. So that my district only was funded 3/5 of that money. I have some special education teachers that never have kids. They work full-time inclusion. They were not funded. Our librarians were not funded. It was only teachers that had a class roster that received that money. So that's the money that came into the districts. The problem also being we had a huge increase in medical cost. We've had increases in our state retirement pullout. So depending on how your district, where they were at the time, where if they were able to absorb some of that, Chandler was one of the more fortunate districts that they were able to fully fund the 10%. How long that will last, I don't know, because it's not really a sustainable thing. They had their rainy day fund, so they were able to give their teachers their 10%, but I know many teachers who saw nothing after they paid for because you can take, it was really 9% because we'd gotten 1% back in the fall. It was really 9%. But when you take 9% and you only give it to your roster teachers, there's no superintendent on the planet that in their right mind would only give it to the roster teacher. They would have upheaval like no other. You can't not, oh, you have a roster, you're going to get your raise, but you special education teacher, sorry, you're out of luck because you don't have a roster. So that 9% had to then be divided amongst more. So the typical teacher maybe saw 5 to 6%, but then when we talk about the increase in healthcare and the increase in the retirement, some teachers saw nothing. So, yes, no. Okay.
Has the election of Cathy Hoffman helped your advocacy?
Kathy could probably speak to this most, but I will say yes. And I'll let Kathy speak to this one because she has been doing so much with that aspect of it.
Yes, Cathy Hoffman has definitely made a huge difference. They have actually established an ESA task force to address some of the issues that have been points of contention, whether they're inequities in the way the program is administered or expansions that certain groups, special interest groups, are continuing to push. And Save Our Schools Arizona, I'm so proud we were invited to be on that task force. So as well as several parents of special education kids who we have been working with. So our voices are loud and clear. And we're very interested in having the ESA program administered equitably because it's a stopgap program until our actual public schools are funded. These kids really do still need that attention. So Cathy has been very open to our voices and our advice, and we have a very good, strong line of communication with her and her department. She has a huge amount of work ahead of her to, in terms of both the functionality of her department, the morale of her department after the prior administration. So I'm just terribly impressed with the work that she's doing, and so excited to see the changes that she's going to bring to the Department of Education.
Yes, and as an we want an educator leading educators. To us, that was critically important.
Excuse me, you mentioned that the Red Red movement last year, and their initiative was taken off for a technicality. I'm wondering if you had a position on this initiative that would have created a more progressive tax code for the state income.
That's another complicated question because there are so many different ways to fund education, and Arizona is sort of an aberration in terms of how states typically fund education, because we are a very, very low property tax state, and that is by design because the government has wanted to attract people to move here, particularly retirees who don't want to pay a lot of property taxes. So we are an extremely high sales tax state and a very low property tax state. And so our funding of the government is sort of upside down. There is polling all the time on what type of taxation people want to see to fund public education. And it is a mystery to me, but sales tax is by far is one of the very most popular ways that Arizonans want to be able to fund education, and they support increases in sales tax by far over increases in property taxes. It is a complete mystery to me why that is, but it is, according to polling that has remained very consistent over the years. So I do know that sales tax is considered very regressive, but Save Our Schools Arizona, we are extremely pragmatic. We want to be able to fund education. We don't want to continue to have generations of children leaving our public schools in the condition that they are now, and being ill prepared for the workforce. So we are looking at all types of different funding sources for public education. And as a group, we are very open to considering sales tax, in part because we want to succeed. So we want people to vote in favor of the type of funding that will be effective for our schools. So I don't know why it is, but sales tax, even though it is very regressive, is extremely popular.
And if you do have an opinion on those issues, I know Sylvia Allen introduced a bill earlier in the year, and it was available on RTS, or request to speak, to make an opinion. And I know at our LD captain meeting, it was kind of, this is happening, put how you feel about it, because people had different opinions about it. But if you have an opinion about a bill or funding, or even that's not related to education, it's just a really great resource for you to use and make sure your voice is heard there.
Okay, I have a comment and then I have a question. When I was first starting out in life, I was a teacher in Miami. My first year I earned $4,000. This was 1966. You can understand why I didn't stick with teaching. And our classroom size was 35, and that was considered normal. Then I moved to Pacific Palisades in California, where I earned $6,000 for my first year, and our class size was 35, and that was considered normal. So I think you people have it rather easy in some respects, having small classrooms of 23 or whatever. That's amazing. I mean, we would have thought we'd died and gone to humanist heaven. However, my question is, what is the underlying cause of the reasons that the Koch brothers and DeVos and all these other people would like to disassemble public schools? Does it have to do with religion? And that has not been brought up here. I think it's on everybody's mind that they would like to get away from the secularism that is in schools and teaching evolution and not praising God in schools. This is a stealth movement, and we have not addressed that, and I'd like to hear your opinions on that. Thank you.
I am thrilled to be able to address that, because when I was first dealing with this legislation 2 years ago, I was utterly baffled as to why anybody would want to undermine and defund public education. And I spent months researching, and the book that finally put it all together for me was called Democracy in Chains by Nancy McLean. An amazing, incredibly well-researched book about the origins of essentially what is a libertarian philosophy that the Koch brothers have embraced and funded, although they did not originate. So this book addresses how a fringe philosophy of libertarianism, which is unfettered free market capitalism, has become mainstream in America, and a large part of that is because of the Koch brothers and because of the funding sources that have been available to them. And my understanding is that there are a couple of major reasons, one of which is economic. You can call it greed, making money, and that's the unfettered free market capitalism part, and the other part is the religious not wanting to separate religion from education in public schools. And I think that is part of what Betsy DeVos and her family's motivation come from. So there are multiple reasons, but my reading has shown me that those are the two major forces that are driving this desire to privatize public education, so that people can teach their children, they can, as they call it, individualize their curriculum, but really it's to be able to teach their children anything they want. Yes. Well, that is what Save Our Schools Arizona is working very hard to do. This has been decades in the making. The groups, and it's a very deliberate process to defund public education, along with, you've seen, I'm sure, articles about privatization in the military, privatization of prisons. I mean, it is just part of the entire privatization movement that has gained so much momentum over the past few decades. And it's been a step-by-step process. It's been extremely deliberate. And we are basically, now that it is an emergency, we are seeing what has been going on for years. Until SB 1431, the voucher bill, was referred to the voters 2 years ago, the groups that have been pushing privatization have nobody has ever said no to them. Every single bill they introduced was passed. So we are just starting to push back. It's going to be a long, long process. It was decades in the making. It's going to be a long time in the undoing. And that is one of the reasons why I really urge you to get involved in state politics. That's, these are the laws that are affecting our community. And, attending some of these hearings at the legislature, getting on requests to speak, signing up for our mailing list, you will learn a huge amount about what is going on right now in Arizona, and you'll be able to make a difference.
We send out action steps, so in our emails, if you join the email list, we send out this is what's coming up and this is what's going to be in committee this week. Go to RTS and speak, or show up at the Capitol. At the ed committees, they're usually, it's hard for, like me, I'd love to be there, but they're 2 o'clock on a Tuesday. I'm in the classroom. So those of you that are not in the classroom, we'd love for you to be down there and to be a voice, get our red shirts and be a voice, because those of us that are doing the daily work can't always be there. But watch your legislators, watch how they vote. I mean, that is really a true, you want a pulse, that's where you take your pulse. And then get behind the people that are going to put a stop to this.
Last question.
Yes, I'm married to a teacher and have school-age children, so this is a very passionate topic for me. I wrote a politician, a state politician, and was surprised I got what seemed to be a direct response, and I wanted to get your opinion on that response. This might be a sort of a summarization here, but what he told me was that based on the product that the educational system produces, that our spend is just fine, that our college readiness and graduation rates are above average. And I was wondering what your comment on that would be.
I'll take this one. I'll use a personal story. I think personal stories, I use those a lot when I testify because I think the personal story carries a lot of weight. So my daughter graduated top of her class from Gilbert Public Schools. She was number 3. She had the perfect ACT score on 1 sit. She had 14 AP tests. So by all standards, she was the cream of the crop. She received a full ride to Northwestern University in Chicago, where she is graduating in June. Our entire first year was spent with her on the verge of a nervous breakdown, in tears, constantly, wanting to drop out. I get a little emotional. Therapy sessions galore because she said, I am not ready. I have everything that they said I needed on this checklist. SAT, ACT, AP. I am not ready. Mom, these kids are doing things, she's a pre-med major, that I only read about. They did it. She said, I did not have an AP chemistry teacher. They didn't have one to hire at her school. I never had the opportunity to take AP Chem, and now I'm sitting here at Northwestern in a classroom full of kids that all took AP Chem, and I don't know what I'm doing. So we can have graduation rates, but graduation rates, you got to track those beyond just that moment in time. And like I said, I can speak from my personal experience of her feeling so underprepared when she got to that 4-year university because she chose to leave the state of Arizona. I think if she'd stayed in Arizona, she would have